Ladies and gentlemen, today we look back at one of the most famous battles in ancient history, a battle that has become a symbol of resistance, courage, and sacrifice. It is the story of warriors who faced insurmountable odds, yet refused to surrender. Their defiance against a mighty empire has inspired countless generations, and even today, their legacy remains a powerful lesson in perseverance and determination. The year was 480 BCE, and the world stood on the brink of a monumental conflict. In the east, the vast Persian Empire, stretching from the borders of India to the shores of the Aegean, had set its sights on conquering Greece. This was no ordinary invasion. It was an attempt to crush the spirit of free people and bring an independent land under the rule of a great empire. At the heart of this invasion was a ruler whose ambition knew no bounds. With an army that some ancient sources claim to be in the millions, though modern estimates suggest it was still in the hundreds of thousands, the Persian king sought to subjugate the Greek city-states. These small, often divided territories were known for their fierce independence, but against such a colossal force, their chances seemed slim. And yet, Greece did not submit. Knowing that their land, their people, and their way of life were at stake, the Greeks prepared to fight. But they needed a strategy. They could not meet the Persians in open battle, where sheer numbers would crush them. Instead, they needed a place where a smaller force could hold back a larger one, a battlefield where skill and determination could outweigh numbers. That place was Thermopylae, a narrow pass between towering cliffs and the Aegean Sea. It was a natural bottleneck, a place where only a small number of warriors could fight at any given time, neutralizing the advantage of a massive army. This was where the Greeks would make their stand. This battle was not just about territory. It was a fight for survival, for the right to live as free men rather than subjects of a foreign empire. It was a stand against tyranny, a moment in history when a few brave souls chose to face overwhelming odds rather than bow in submission. As we delve into the events of this legendary battle, we must remember that history is not just a collection of dates and names. It is a record of human struggle, of sacrifice, and of the unbreakable will to resist oppression. The Battle of Thermopylae was one such moment, where the actions of a few would inspire the many, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. To truly understand the significance of the Battle of Thermopylae, we must first look at the events that led to it. This was not just a random clash between two opposing forces. It was part of a much larger conflict, one that had been brewing for years. It was a struggle between two vastly different civilizations. One, a massive empire that sought to expand its dominance over the known world, and the other, a collection of fiercely independent city-states that valued their freedom above all else. The origins of this great conflict can be traced back to the earlier Persian invasion of Greece in 490 BCE. A decade before Thermopylae, the Persian king had launched an attack against Greece in what would become known as the First Persian Invasion. The Persians sought to punish the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, for supporting a rebellion in Ionia, an area of Greek settlements that had been under Persian rule. However, despite their superior numbers, the Persians were defeated at the famous Battle of Marathon, where the Greek hoplites, heavily armored infantry soldiers, proved that disciplined warfare and strategic planning could overcome the vast Persian forces. That defeat was a humiliation for the Persian Empire. It proved that Greece was not an easy target, and it planted the seeds for a much larger and more ruthless invasion. Determined to avenge this loss and bring Greece under Persian control, the new Persian ruler spent years assembling one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. He sought to do what his predecessor had failed to achieve, crush the Greek resistance once and for all. This invasion would be different. Instead of a single attack, the Persian forces launched a full-scale military campaign, advancing by both land and sea. Their strategy was methodical and overwhelming. Vast fleets moved along the Aegean coast, while the main army, consisting of hundreds of thousands of soldiers from all corners of the Persian Empire, marched toward Greece. This was not just a Persian force, it was a multinational army, made up of warriors from Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe, all unified under the banner of their empire. Greece, meanwhile, was in a state of uncertainty. Unlike the Persian Empire, which was a single, centralized power, Greece was divided into numerous city-states, each with its own government and military. While some were willing to fight, others considered surrendering, believing resistance to be futile. However, a few powerful city-states, including Athens and a militaristic state known for its warrior culture, recognized the threat and knew that if they did not stand together, Greece would fall. A council of Greek city-states was formed to discuss their response. Knowing that the Persians would soon arrive, they devised a plan. They would make their stand at Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass that served as a gateway into central Greece. The reasoning was simple. If they could hold the Persians there, they could buy time for the rest of Greece to prepare for war. And so, a small but elite force of Greek warriors, led by one of history's most legendary commanders, marched to Thermopylae. They knew they would be facing an army that vastly outnumbered them, but they also knew that if they could delay the Persian advance, they could give Greece a fighting chance. This was not just a battle over land, it was a battle over ideals. The Persians sought to expand their empire through conquest, demanding submission from those they conquered. The Greeks, however, valued their independence and were willing to fight to the death to protect it. Thermopylae was more than just a military strategy. It was a statement to the world that they would not go down without a fight. As the Persian army advanced toward Thermopylae, the stage was set for one of the most famous last stands in history. What happened next would become a tale of heroism, betrayal, and unshakable defiance, a battle that would be remembered for thousands of years. As the Persian war machine advanced toward Greece, it brought with it an army the likes of which the world had rarely seen. This was not just a simple military campaign, it was a show of force meant to intimidate and overwhelm any opposition. The Persian Empire, stretching from the shores of the Aegean to the Indus Valley, had access to a vast population and resources that allowed it to raise one of the largest armies in history. The sheer scale of this force struck fear into the hearts of many Greek city-states, some of which even chose to submit rather than face annihilation. The Persian army was a massive and diverse force, composed of warriors from different regions of the empire. It included soldiers from Persia, Media, Assyria, Bactria, Egypt, India, and many other territories under Persian rule. Each unit brought its own weapons, tactics, and combat styles, making the Persian military a highly versatile and adaptable force. The core of the army consisted of Persian infantry, archers, and cavalry, but it also included elite warriors known as the Immortals, a unit of 10,000 highly trained soldiers whose numbers were always maintained. Whenever one of them fell in battle, another immediately took his place, ensuring that their ranks never seemed to dwindle. In addition to its land forces, the Persian Empire also had a powerful navy, which played a crucial role in supporting the invasion. Hundreds of warships sailed along the Greek coastline, ensuring that the army had supplies and reinforcements as it marched. This coordination between land and sea forces made the Persian campaign a formidable one, designed to crush any resistance in its path. Against this overwhelming force stood a small but determined Greek army. While the Persian army may have been one of the largest ever assembled, the Greek force at Thermopylae was vastly outnumbered. Estimates suggest that the Greeks had only around 7,000 men in total, a tiny fraction compared to the massive Persian host. Despite their smaller numbers, the Greeks possessed two critical advantages: superior training and strategic positioning. The core of the Greek force consisted of hoplites, heavily armored infantry soldiers who fought in a disciplined formation known as the Phalanx. The hoplites wore bronze armor, carried large round shields known as aspes, and wielded long spears designed for close combat. Unlike many of the Persian infantry, who wore lighter armor and relied on mobility and archery, the hoplites were built for direct, head-on engagements. Their strength lay in their ability to fight as a unified force, using their shields to protect one another while striking at their enemies with precise, coordinated thrusts. Among the Greek warriors, there was one group that stood out, the most feared and respected warriors in all of Greece. These men were raised from childhood to be soldiers, trained in the art of war, and conditioned to endure pain and hardship without fear. They believed in discipline, honor, and duty above all else, and they were known for their willingness to fight to the death rather than retreat. They led the Greek defense at Thermopylae, setting an example for the rest of the allied forces. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Greeks had one key advantage: the terrain. Thermopylae was a narrow pass between the mountains and the sea, only a few dozen meters wide in some places. This meant that no matter how large the Persian army was, they could not bring their full strength to bear. Only a limited number of soldiers could fight at any given time, which allowed the Greeks to hold the line against waves of enemy attacks. The contrast between the two armies could not have been more striking. The Persians relied on their overwhelming numbers, ranged attacks, and cavalry, while the Greeks depended on their discipline, heavy armor, and superior tactics. The Greeks knew they could not win in an open battle, but they also knew that as long as they held Thermopylae, they could prevent the Persian advance and buy time for the rest of Greece to prepare for war. As the Persian army arrived at the gates of Thermopylae, the stage was set for a legendary battle. One side was a vast empire, seeking to expand its dominion over the world. The other was a small but resolute force, determined to defend its freedom at any cost. The outcome of this confrontation would not only decide the fate of Greece, but would also shape the course of history itself. To fully grasp why the Battle of Thermopylae unfolded the way it did, we must first understand the geography of the battlefield. This was not a random location. It was chosen deliberately by the Greek defenders as the ideal place to make a stand against the vast Persian army. The terrain of Thermopylae played a crucial role in shaping the battle, giving the Greeks a chance to resist against seemingly impossible odds. Thermopylae, which translates to hot gates, was a narrow pass nestled between the towering cliffs of the Kallidromo Mountains and the shores of the Malian Gulf. It was named after the natural hot springs found in the area, which were well known in ancient Greece. But beyond its thermal waters, the pass was of great military significance. It served as one of the few entry points into central Greece from the north, making it a natural choke point that could be used for defense. At its narrowest point, the pass was only about 15 meters, 50 feet, wide. In some areas, it was even narrower. This meant that no matter how vast the Persian army was, they could not march through in overwhelming numbers. Instead, they would be forced to send their soldiers into battle in smaller waves, limiting their numerical advantage. The Greeks, despite being vastly outnumbered, could use this bottleneck to their advantage, positioning themselves in a tight formation that would be difficult to break. The Persians, accustomed to fighting on open plains where their cavalry and archers could be used effectively, found themselves in a completely different kind of battle. Their cavalry, one of their strongest assets, was rendered useless in the narrow and rocky terrain of Thermopylae. The Persian infantry, many of whom wore light armor and carried shorter weapons, also struggled against the heavily armored Greek hoplites, who were well-trained in close-quarters combat. The Greeks positioned themselves in a defensive formation known as the Phalanx, a tight-knit wall of shields and spears. Because of the pass's narrowness, this formation was nearly impenetrable. The Greeks could fight shoulder to shoulder, protecting one another while striking at the enemy with long spears. The Persians, unable to outflank them due to the cliffs on one side and the sea on the other, were forced into a head-on assault, which played directly into the strengths of the Greek warriors. Another key feature of the battlefield was the Phocian Wall, an ancient defensive structure built years earlier by the Phocians to protect their lands from northern invaders. The Greeks made use of this ruined wall, repairing it to create an even stronger defensive position. This made it even harder for the Persians to break through. Thermopylae's location also provided another advantage. It allowed the Greeks to coordinate with their naval forces. Just off the coast, the Greek navy was engaged in a simultaneous battle against the Persian fleet at the Battle of Artemisium. By holding the Persians at Thermopylae, the Greeks ensured that their navy had time to prevent the Persian ships from outflanking them by sea. The land and naval battles were closely connected, making Thermopylae a key piece of the Greek defense strategy. However, the geography of the area also held a hidden danger, one that would ultimately change the course of the battle. While the main pass was narrow and easy to defend, there was a lesser-known mountain path that bypassed the Greek position. If the Persians were to discover and use this path, they could surround the Greek defenders, cutting off their only escape route. The Greeks were aware of this risk and stationed a small force of Phocian soldiers to guard the path, hoping to prevent any enemy from using it. As the battle began, the geography of Thermopylae worked in the Greeks' favor. They held their ground, forcing the Persians into a brutal and costly struggle. However, their greatest fear would soon come true. Betrayal would lead the Persians to the secret path, threatening to undo everything the Greeks had fought for. The pass of Thermopylae was more than just a battlefield. It was a natural fortress, a symbol of resistance, and a defining factor in one of history's most famous last stands. It was here, in this narrow corridor between mountain and sea, that a small band of warriors would make history, standing against the tide of a vast empire in a battle that would be remembered for thousands of years. As the Persian army arrived at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the Greek defenders stood ready, fully aware of the daunting challenge ahead. Though vastly outnumbered, they had one advantage: the geography of the battlefield. They had carefully chosen this location because its narrowness would prevent the Persians from using their overwhelming numbers to full effect. However, superior positioning alone was not enough. It was the discipline, strategy, and sheer determination of the Greek warriors that allowed them to hold their ground against one of the largest armies in history. At the heart of the Greek defense was the Phalanx, an unbreakable formation that had been perfected over generations. The hoplites, the heavily armored Greek infantry, stood shoulder to shoulder in tight rows, each warrior protected by his large circular shield while thrusting forward with long spears. This formation was the key to their defense. It created a nearly impenetrable wall of shields and spears, forcing the Persians into brutal close-quarters combat where Greek armor and superior weaponry gave them the upper hand. The Persians, accustomed to fighting on open plains where they could rely on cavalry and archers, struggled against this formation. Their standard infantry carried shorter spears and lighter shields, making them ill-equipped for prolonged engagements with the heavily armored Greeks. The Persians would charge forward in waves, only to be cut down by the disciplined Greek warriors who fought as a single unit. Even the elite Persian force, known as the Immortals, the king's personal bodyguard and one of the most feared units in the Persian army, failed to break through the Greek lines. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Greek defense was their ability to rotate fresh troops into the fight while maintaining the phalanx formation. Since they had a smaller force, they could not afford to tire out their men too quickly. Instead, they fought in shifts, allowing some warriors to rest while others continued to hold the line. This not only kept them from exhausting themselves, but also ensured that their formation remained intact and their morale stayed high. The first day of battle was a disaster for the Persians. Their attacks were met with unwavering resistance, and the Greeks cut down thousands of enemy soldiers while suffering minimal losses themselves. The narrow pass prevented the Persians from using their numerical superiority effectively, and the Greeks' superior armor and discipline proved to be decisive. As the Persian soldiers fell, their bodies began to pile up, further obstructing their own forces from advancing. On the second day, the Persian king, frustrated by the failure of his troops, ordered an even more aggressive assault. Once again, the Greek warriors held firm, repelling attack after attack with the same disciplined formations and fierce determination. By this point, the Greeks had not only withstood 2 days of relentless assaults, but had also inflicted heavy casualties on the Persian army, demonstrating the incredible effectiveness of their strategy and training. Throughout the battle, the Greek warriors fought with an unshakable resolve. They knew that they were fighting not just for themselves, but for all of Greece. Their mission was not necessarily to win the battle outright, but to hold the Persians at bay for as long as possible, buying valuable time for the rest of Greece to prepare for the coming war. Despite their initial success, the Greeks knew that their position was not invincible. They relied on the narrowness of the pass to maintain their advantage, but they also knew of a hidden danger, a secret mountain path that, if discovered by the Persians, could be used to outflank them. To prevent this, a small force of Phocian soldiers was stationed to guard the path, ensuring that no enemy could use it to gain an advantage. For 2 days, the Greek defenders proved that courage, strategy, and discipline could overcome overwhelming numbers. They fought not as individuals, but as a single, unified force, defying the might of the largest empire in the world. However, the fate of the battle was about to change, as the Persians would soon discover a way to bypass the Greek defenses, turning the tide of the conflict in an unexpected and devastating way. As the sun rose over the pass of Thermopylae, the Persian army prepared for battle, eager to crush the defiant Greek defenders who stood in their way. The Persian king, confident in the overwhelming size of his forces, expected an easy victory. After all, his empire had conquered vast territories stretching across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. What could a small, fragmented alliance of Greek city-states possibly do against such a colossal military force? However, the Greek defenders had no intention of surrendering. They knew that if the Persians broke through Thermopylae, the heart of Greece would be open to invasion. This was their chosen battleground, and they were determined to make the enemy pay dearly for every step forward. The first Persian assault began with a massive charge by infantry troops drawn from different parts of the empire. These soldiers were lightly armored and armed with short spears and wicker shields, effective in open-field battles where speed and numbers mattered, but completely unsuited for the brutal, close-quarters combat of the Thermopylae Pass. As they rushed forward, the Greek hoplites stood firm in their tight phalanx formation, a solid wall of overlapping shields and long spears. The Persian soldiers, expecting to overwhelm the Greeks with sheer numbers, instead found themselves crashing against an immovable barrier of bronze and iron. In the narrow pass, the advantage of numbers was neutralized. Only a limited number of Persian soldiers could engage at a time, preventing them from surrounding or flanking the Greeks. As wave after wave of Persian infantry charged forward, they were met with relentless spear thrusts, shields that pushed them back, and swords that cut them down when they got too close. The Greeks, highly trained in close combat, made expert use of their weapons and armor. Their spears were longer than those of the Persians, allowing them to strike first. Their bronze shields were far stronger than the enemy's wicker shields, giving them better protection. And their discipline ensured that their formation remained intact, preventing any gaps that the enemy could exploit. The Persian king, watching from a distance, was shocked at the resilience of the Greek defenders. He had expected a swift and decisive victory, yet his troops were being slaughtered by a force that was only a fraction of his army's size. Frustrated, he ordered his archers to unleash a rain of arrows upon the Greek lines. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of arrows darkened the sky, descending upon the defenders. But the Greeks, with their heavy armor and large shields, simply raised their defenses and let the arrows bounce off harmlessly. They even mocked the Persian strategy, reportedly saying that they would fight in the shade rather than be intimidated by such an attack. Seeing that his regular infantry was unable to break through, the Persian king decided to send in his most elite troops, the Immortals. This was his personal bodyguard unit, a force of 10,000 hand-picked warriors who were considered the best soldiers in the Persian army. Their name came from the fact that whenever one of them fell in battle, another immediately took his place, making it seem as though their numbers never diminished. The Immortals were better trained and equipped than the regular Persian infantry, and their arrival signaled a more serious attempt to breach the Greek defenses. However, even they struggled against the formidable Greek phalanx. The tight formation of Greek hoplites, combined with their superior weapons and armor, allowed them to hold their ground. The Immortals found themselves trapped in the same disadvantageous conditions as the rest of the Persian army, unable to maneuver effectively in the narrow pass and unable to break through the Greek shield wall. As the battle raged on, the Greeks not only held their position but also executed clever tactics to maximize their effectiveness. At times, they pretended to retreat, luring the Persian soldiers forward before suddenly turning around and attacking them with renewed ferocity. This psychological warfare, combined with their superior discipline, caused confusion and panic among the enemy ranks. For 2 consecutive days, the Persians launched relentless attacks against the Greek defenders, but every attempt was met with the same brutal resistance. The Greeks stood their ground, cutting down thousands of enemy soldiers while suffering minimal casualties themselves. The pass of Thermopylae had become a killing field for the Persian army, and it was becoming clear that brute force alone would not be enough to break through. Despite their remarkable success, the Greeks knew that they could not hold out forever. Their numbers were limited, and their supplies were not endless. However, as long as the Persians continued attacking head-on, the Greeks had confidence that they could withstand the onslaught. What they did not expect was that the real danger would not come from the battlefield in front of them, but from a hidden path behind them. The tide of battle was about to turn in a way that no amount of strategy or bravery could counter. For 2 days, the Greek defenders at Thermopylae had defied the odds, holding back the vast Persian army with their superior tactics and unbreakable phalanx formation. The Persian king, frustrated by his army's repeated failures, searched for an alternative way to break through the Greek defenses. He needed a way to bypass the narrow pass and surround the Greek forces, cutting off their only escape route. It was at this crucial moment that an act of betrayal would change the course of the battle. A Greek traitor, a man driven either by greed or fear, approached the Persian camp with valuable information. His name would be remembered in history with scorn and hatred, for he offered the Persians exactly what they needed: knowledge of a secret path through the mountains that would allow them to outflank the Greek defenders. This path, known as the Anapeia Path, was a little-known mountain trail that wound its way behind the Greek position at Thermopylae. Though it was not commonly used, it provided an alternative route that avoided the main pass. The Greeks were aware of its existence and had stationed a small force of Phocian soldiers to guard it. These men, numbering around 1,000, were tasked with ensuring that no enemy could use the trail to attack the Greek rear. Upon learning of this betrayal, the Persian king immediately seized the opportunity. He ordered a contingent of his elite immortals to march under the cover of darkness, guided by the traitor, to take the mountain path. Moving swiftly and silently, they ascended the rugged terrain, winding their way through the dense forests and steep slopes of Mount Calidromo. The path was treacherous, but with the guidance of their Greek informant, they made steady progress. As dawn approached, the Phocian guards stationed on the mountain awoke to the sound of movement in the trees. They had been caught off guard. Before they could mount an organized defense, they found themselves under attack by the advancing Persian force. In the chaos that followed, the Phocians retreated to higher ground, hoping to make a final stand. However, the Persians had no interest in engaging them in battle. They had a much greater target in mind. They ignored the Phocian force and continued down the path, pressing forward to encircle the Greek defenders at Thermopylae. Meanwhile, at the main pass, the Greeks had no immediate knowledge of the betrayal that was unfolding behind them. They continued to hold the line against repeated Persian assaults, believing that their position was secure. However, as the sun began to rise on the 3rd day of battle, scouts arrived with devastating news. The Persians had discovered the mountain path, and a large force was already moving to surround them. The realization struck like a thunderbolt. The carefully laid Greek defense, which had relied entirely on the impassable nature of the pass, was now in jeopardy. They had been outmaneuvered, not by superior strategy, but by treachery. The enemy would soon be upon them from behind, and there would be no way to retreat or regroup. Panic could have overtaken the Greek ranks, but the Greek commanders, hardened by years of warfare, knew they had to make a decision quickly. They understood that the battle was now lost. The question was no longer how to win, but how to fight with honor in the face of certain defeat. A fateful choice lay before them. Should they attempt to flee and preserve their forces for future battles, or should they make a final stand at Thermopylae, buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare for the Persian advance? As the Persian force closed in from the rear, the defenders had only moments to decide their fate. The betrayal had sealed their doom, but the manner in which they faced their end would define their legacy for all time. As the sun rose on the 3rd and final day of battle, the Greek defenders at Thermopylae faced an impossible reality. Their position had been compromised. The betrayal had led the Persians to the secret mountain path, and now thousands of enemy soldiers were descending from the hills, preparing to encircle the remaining Greek warriors. The defenders had spent 2 days fighting with unmatched discipline, pushing back wave after wave of Persian troops, but now there was no hope of victory. The Greek commanders, realizing that the battle was lost, gathered their men to make a final, fateful decision. Some of the allied Greek contingents, particularly those from central Greece, recognized that staying would mean certain death. Many of them chose to retreat before the Persians could complete their encirclement, hoping to regroup and continue the fight elsewhere. However, not all would leave. A small but determined force, led by the Spartan warriors and their allies, chose to remain behind, prepared to fight to the last man. This decision was not made lightly. The Spartans, bound by their warrior code, could not simply turn and flee. To them, honor and duty meant more than survival. Their way of life revolved around the belief that a warrior must never retreat, that death in battle was the highest form of glory. Their leader, knowing the importance of their sacrifice, stood firm, choosing to delay the Persians for as long as possible to give Greece more time to prepare for the coming invasion. As the Persian forces tightened the noose around them, the Greeks made one final adjustment to their tactics. Instead of holding the narrowest section of the pass as they had before, they moved forward to fight in a wider space. This would allow them greater mobility and ensure that they could engage as many Persian soldiers as possible before they were overwhelmed. With no illusions of victory, the Greeks fought with an unmatched ferocity. Their spears, which had served them so well in the previous days, eventually shattered under the relentless combat. Undeterred, they drew their swords and continued the fight, cutting down as many Persians as they could. The ground, already soaked with blood from the past 2 days of fighting, became a brutal arena where the last stand of the Greeks unfolded. The Spartans, in particular, fought with legendary determination. They were outnumbered hundreds to one, yet they refused to surrender. Even as their comrades fell around them, they stood their ground, battling on with swords, daggers, and even their bare hands when their weapons were lost. The Persian soldiers, despite their overwhelming numerical advantage, found themselves struggling to bring down these last defenders. The Persian king, watching the battle unfold, was astonished at the sheer resilience of the Greeks. He had expected them to flee or surrender once they realized they were surrounded, but instead, they chose to fight to the very end. Their defiance enraged him, yet at the same time, it was clear that they had gained the admiration of even their enemies. As the battle neared its final moments, the Greek defenders made their last stand on a small hill, refusing to be cut down without a fight. The Persians, unable to break them in hand-to-hand combat, resorted to a final brutal tactic. Archers were ordered forward, and from a safe distance, they unleashed a relentless hail of arrows upon the remaining Greeks. Hundreds of arrows darkened the sky, blotting out the sun as they rained down upon the last warriors of Thermopylae. The final defenders of Thermopylae had fallen, their bodies lying where they had made their last stand. The narrow pass, once a formidable fortress held by a handful of determined warriors, was now in Persian hands. The battlefield, littered with thousands of Persian and Greek corpses, bore witness to the brutal struggle that had taken place over 3 days. Yet, despite the overwhelming Persian victory, the cost of their triumph had been staggering. The Persian king had expected an easy conquest, but instead, he had lost thousands of his finest soldiers to a force that was outnumbered at least 50 to 1. His elite Immortals, whom he had once considered invincible, had been humiliated in battle. The resistance at Thermopylae had delayed his advance, disrupted his plans, and, most importantly, shattered the illusion that the Persian army was unstoppable. The Greeks who had retreated before the final stand spread the news of the battle far and wide. They carried with them not just the tragedy of Thermopylae, but the inspiration of the defenders' bravery. Across the Greek city-states, people listened in awe as they heard of the Spartans and their allies who had fought to the last man, refusing to surrender even in the face of certain death. What had happened at Thermopylae was no mere defeat. It was a message, one that would ignite the flames of resistance across all of Greece. In Athens, the news was met with both sorrow and determination. The Persian army was still advancing, and the Greek city-states knew that the war was far from over. But the sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought them precious time. Thanks to the delay, the Greeks had been able to strengthen their defenses, evacuate key cities, and prepare for the battles to come. The loss at Thermopylae was not in vain. It was a turning point that set the stage for future victories. Among the Greek people, a newfound sense of unity emerged. The various city-states, often divided by rivalries and political conflicts, saw in the defenders of Thermopylae a symbol of what could be achieved if they stood together. For too long, the Greek world had been fractured, with Athens, Sparta, and other cities competing for power. But now, with the Persian threat looming over all of them, they realized that only through unity could they hope to preserve their way of life. The Persian army, though victorious at Thermopylae, soon found that their conquest of Greece would not be as simple as they had imagined. The Greeks, fueled by the memory of Thermopylae, would soon prove that their spirit could not be broken. The true battle for Greece had only just begun. Though the battlefield at Thermopylae was littered with the bodies of its last defenders, their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Their story would live on, not just in Greece, but across the world, becoming one of the most enduring legends of courage, honor, and unwavering resistance against overwhelming odds. The name Thermopylae would forever be associated with the ultimate test of bravery, where a few stood against many, where men chose to fight and die for something greater than themselves. The significance of the battle did not lie in the number of casualties inflicted or the territory gained. It lay in the example set by the warriors who made their final stand. The Spartans and their allies at Thermopylae embodied the ideals of duty, sacrifice, and resilience, demonstrating that true strength is not measured in numbers, but in the willingness to fight for what is right, even in the face of certain death. The battle had a profound impact on the course of history. In the immediate aftermath, the Persian army continued its advance, capturing and burning Athens. However, the delay at Thermopylae had bought the Greeks crucial time to regroup and prepare. The heroic stand of the defenders inspired the Greek forces to unite against the Persian threat, leading to decisive victories at the Battle of Salamis and later at Plataea. These battles ultimately turned the tide of the war, forcing the Persians to retreat and preserving Greek independence. Beyond the military consequences, Thermopylae became a defining moment in Greek culture and identity. The concept of dying for one's homeland, of standing firm against impossible odds, became central to the Greek ethos. The Spartans, in particular, enshrined the memory of their fallen king and warriors, ensuring that their names would be remembered for generations. The famous epitaph inscribed at the site of the battle reads, "Go, tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." These words immortalized the sacrifice of the defenders and served as a reminder that freedom is not given but earned through struggle and perseverance. The lesson of Thermopylae extended far beyond the Greek world. Over the centuries, military leaders, revolutionaries, and ordinary people facing oppression or impossible odds have drawn inspiration from this legendary battle. It has been cited in moments of resistance, from wars of independence to modern conflicts, symbolizing the unbreakable human spirit. Historians and scholars have long debated the finer details of Thermopylae, but its essence remains unchanged. It was more than a military engagement. It was a statement of defiance, a demonstration that a small but determined force could challenge the might of an empire. The Persian army may have won the battle, but in the grander scheme of history, the defenders of Thermopylae won something far greater: the respect, admiration, and lasting memory of all who came after them. Even today, the legend of Thermopylae continues to inspire. From books and films to military academies and historical studies, the story of those brave warriors remains a symbol of what it means to stand against tyranny, to fight for one's people, and to embrace sacrifice for the greater good. The battle may have taken place over 2,000 years ago, but its lessons are timeless, reminding us all that courage, duty, and honor never fade.